So in Illustrator, to adjust whatever your design is in a way that isn't just a box or a bottle, there is something called the warp tool, and it's not on the toolbar, it's not anywhere you would really expect it to be. What I've done is this whole thing has been grouped together. Nothing has been rasterized, everything's still vector based. But what I'm going to do is select that whole group and let's see, go to Object and Envelope Distort and make with Warp. Another thing you can do, and I'm sure you guys have probably tried this with other applications too, is if there's something you're looking for and you don't know where the menu is, you can type it in the search and then it'll show you where the different effects are. So that's another way to get to where you want it to go. So there's kind of two places, I guess. There's the Envelope Distort, which pretty much does the same thing, and then there is one under Effects. I'll do the one under Effects first. So the thing with the Warp tool in Illustrator is you're pretty limited to what you can do in the window here. So you click on this drop-down menu and you've got a few things to choose from. So let's see. Let me try Arc. Actually, I'm going to change the color of the background because it's really hard to see up there. Okay, that's easier. So you can see how that kind of bends it upward. These bars here, you can adjust the way it bends, how much it bends, the direction. You can also use these radio buttons to choose which way it bends. So the way it is now with horizontal might be a good way to render it if it looks like it's on a can or something like that. And then vertical kind of puffs it out. So you can play around with this and just try to get the look that you're going for. And these distortion features at the bottom, you can start to kind of adjust the perspective and everything, so that might also be something that's useful to some of you all. But there's all kinds of weird things you can do, so it's just a matter of kind of trying things out and seeing what will work for you. Let's see what the flag one does. Yeah, so you can do all kinds of things. The benefit to doing it this way is, of course, everything is kept in vector, nothing is rasterized. So you can easily go in and make edits to this. So let's say this is the way I want my 3D rendering to be. I can click OK. And I can always go to Appearance, and that effect shows up over here. So if I decide to make any adjustments, I just have to click on that and I can change things around. You will notice that when you make an effect, just like with any other effects that you pull down in Illustrator, it's not going to actually make those vector shapes into the warped shape. So either you just have to manipulate it here. You can also try to do expand, and sometimes that'll convert it so it has that shape as an actual vector object. So now that it's actually converted, I could take some of these points, supposedly, and move them around.
So is that the actual content? Is it a symbol again, or is it just like...
This is all vector, it's not a symbol. So if I undo everything, I can still double click and get to the individual elements if I need to change anything.
I have a question. What if you wanted to just make it seem like it's in a V shape? How can you distort it to make it be a V shape?
You mean like the bag you're doing? Okay. If you're doing it like that, what you could do is use the free transform tool, and it's supposed to bring up a window. Let's see. There we go. So you can pull up the free transform tool and you can choose some of these different distortions. So if you want to make it look, well, you could also use the warp tool for this, but if you do free transform, then you can shift things around so it's kind of at an angle. And like I did before, you could also set up the perspective grid and base the placement of things off of that. So let's say that's the front of the bag, and then for the back part of it, I could take the pen tool and just draw a shape behind it. So depending on how you need to see things, you may want to actually draw each side out. So let's say this is literally the back of the bag. Make it a little bit darker. So I've kind of got a TP looking thing there. And then if it's a bag, you've kind of got this crease on the side. So for that, what I would do is I would have two separate shapes. So I go back and use the pen tool. Use a little bit lighter. And draw in a triangle shape for one side of the, one part of the side that kind of goes inward. And then another one that goes back out and connects to the back. And then that starts to look more like a bag. And then, of course, if you are wanting to make it so it looks like it's kind of sealed at the top, you can play around with that too. So that's how you could do that one. If you wanted to, you could take this and work with the warp tool. Let me go. Let's see. You could go to the warp tool and do some other things just to make it look not so flat, maybe. So yeah, I don't know if you wanted to make it look like it's full of something, you could play around with the warp. Now another thing that you could do, let's say you want this to have some shading on it so it looks like it's in an actual space. You can copy and paste the shape that's masking your main design. So I'm just going deep into the group so I just have this shape and I'm copying it, and then I'm going back outside the group and I'm going to do Command F to paste in front. At least I was. Let's see. Okay, let's try this again. There we go. Okay, so I've got this shape, and then what I can do is put a gradient into this and adjust the gradient with the gradient tool. And a lot of times when I do gradients, I won't use black necessarily. I might use a darker version of the color, the main color of this object, and then you can use the different transparency options to make it look like it's in a space, so it's got some shading to it. So I'm just messing with the opacity and everything so it looks a little bit more subtle.
What if you wanted to design a side panel for that crease, then could you ever make the image be pointy and distort it in a pointy way?
Yeah, you can still use the free transform to do the same thing. So let me take this again. So with the free transform button, the one here at the bottom, you can take these sides and move them together until you get, if you wanted something pointy, you can get what you want. Obviously you would not want it to be in a shape like this. The problem with the distort features or like the transform features in here is each time you go back and transform it, it's going off of your previous transformation. So like this has already been transformed one time. By going back to this tool and trying to do it again, it's going to be a little bit harder to get exactly what I want because the previous image has already been changed so much, if that makes sense. But you can do it. So what you'd want to do, and this is where the template comes into play, you already have everything laid out, and I suggest having all that stuff in a separate document, and then you can group things and copy and paste them into the document where you actually want to assemble your 3D renderings.
Oh, that's a good idea. So then, like, you can use the scissor tool to get each half of the triangle, I guess, and then copy and paste the halves and make them those shapes. Instead of a whole panel at one time trying to be in that weird triangle shape.
Yeah. Okay, so what I want to show next is taking this into Photoshop and just how transforming things in there is a little bit different. So I'm going to select what I want to adjust and copy it and go to Photoshop and make a new document. And when you have something on your clipboard, the preset is to the size of the item on your clipboard. You do want to make sure, though, that the resolution is the quality that you want. Once again, if you are just working in the computer, you're not planning on printing anything out, you could leave it at maybe 144 or 150, so it's still a pretty high resolution, but it's still, it makes the file size a little bit smaller than if you had it at 300, but I'm just going to put it at 300. And you might want to change it to inches just so it's easier to kind of translate it from one to the other. The color mode, depending on whether you want to print it or leave it in the computer, you change that. And then it'll pull up the document. I'm going to do Command V to paste it. It's going to ask if I want to bring it in as a smart object, and initially I'll say OK. And from here I can resize it. When I bring it in, it's actually in free transform mode, so I can scale it down and move it to where I want it. And then I double click into it and it places the object in a spot. Okay. So I'm going to do what I've done before, which is to duplicate the layer just in case anything happens and I need to go back and get the original smart object. And for this part of it, to be able to do the transformations, I'm going to actually rasterize this layer. And to quickly do that, I'm just going to have the layer I duplicated selected. And you can go to the drop-down menu at the top of this window. Let's see. Let me just do Merge Visible. And then it basically rasterizes this image. So just like with the in Illustrator, there is a warp tool. There's this thing called Puppet Warp. I'll show that one in a minute. There's Perspective Warp. Perspective Warp is closer to Perspective Warp and Transform Warp are closer to what you do in Illustrator. So when I do the regular warp, I can actually, unlike in Illustrator, I can actually click on points and move things around and adjust handlebars. So I have a lot more control this way. So let's say, for instance, let's say I do want to make this look like a bag, but I want it to look like it's full of whatever the product is. So I can still move the points around so they're in a type of perspective, but I can use the handlebars to adjust the curves of the sides. And this is working just like a vector object in Illustrator. Okay, so let's say that's the way I want it. I'm going to apply the transformation, and that gives me the final product. The downside to this is if you want to go back and change anything, you'd have to actually go back in the history. So unlike Illustrator, where you can just undo something to go back, and let's say I could copy something and still go back forward to where I was before, in Photoshop, if I go back in history and make a change, I can't go back to where I was before. So that part of it kind of sucks, which is why I usually duplicate whatever the main image is so I can go back and change it later. So that's one kind of warp. I'm going to duplicate the smart object again and rasterize this one if possible. We'll duplicate that one so it's easier. And we'll try perspective warp. Oh, this one's kind of, so this one is kind of like perspective grid in Illustrator. And I think the last time I tried to do it, it wouldn't really work right. But what you're supposed to be able to do is take the object and be able to move it into a space. Yeah, there we go. So I can actually start to shift things around. So unlike the other warp where you can change the angles and things, with this one you can basically look like it's still a flat plane, but you can manipulate it so it looks like it's going towards a horizon line or a vanishing point. So there's that one. And then the other one is puppet warp, which is really weird. So this one, and I looked at some tutorials. I was trying to figure out what the benefit of it is. I think the idea behind it is you can take something in a photo and adjust just one part of it instead of having to go back and take the photo over again. Like in one example, it had a picture of a man in profile, and they used the puppet warp to bend the person's head back so it looked like he was looking up. In terms of this, you can try out these different modes. So there's density. You might want to start off with fewer points. So it gives you all of these points. And then what you do is you start adding these pins in certain spots where you want things to move. So I'm just going to put some in the four corners and then in the middle of each side. And then if you hold down Option, you can roll over the points and you get this, let me zoom in, you get this, you get the arrow that's supposed to let you rotate it. Let's try this one. So you can start to move things around a the rotation thing. I don't know why I can't get it to work, but the rotation part of it, it kind of just warps that one point and twists it around. But everything is kind of based off of where all of these different points are and this weird grid that it puts on it. So, as I mentioned a little bit last week, if you want it to look like a crumpled bag or just a very particular shape, this might be something that you want to try out. So, apply that. So that's how that one works. So those are 3 different ones in Photoshop, and then the other ones in Illustrator. The advantage to Photoshop is that you do have a little bit more control because you can adjust specific points. But like I said, the downside is I had to rasterize all of these, so there's no going back to Illustrator and editing anything. I could take this and take the whole image and put it back in Illustrator, and then if I want to put a gradient on top of it, I can do it in Illustrator, but I can't go back and change the color of the coffee cup or anything like that because it's already flattened. So are there any other questions? Does that help some people with how they might make their objects?